Hello again. Perhaps the greatest lie told about the transatlantic slave trade is that chattel slavery was introduced to North America by white people. I've seen this stated authoritatively in books, on television, and even right here on YouTube. Although it's not hard to prove that this is false, few people really bother to make the effort. It's much easier to go along with the popular myth rather than rocking the boat and making yourself unpopular. In 1886, a case was heard in an American court which was in effect a challenge to the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. That's the one from 1865, which makes slavery unlawful. Now, who would bring a challenge like that 20 years after the end of the Civil War? Perhaps a die-hard and embittered Confederate plantation owner? Well, no. It was actually members of the Tlingit tribe in Alaska who were complaining that forbidding chattel slavery meant that the American government was trying to ride roughshod over their ancient and traditional way of life. Here's a few pictures of Tlingit tribespeople. The case reached the courts in a circuitous fashion. A man called Sarkoi had been seized from a village on the Pacific coast of Washington state by slavers. He belonged to the Haida tribe. It was Flatheads who kidnapped him. That's another tribe in that part of the United States. And they carried him off and then sold him to another tribe. And he was passed on but sold at a profit by that tribe to another. All these tribes practiced chattel slavery, by the way, at that time. And then he ended up in Alaska, where at that time a male slave was worth about 60 Hudson Bay blankets. And he was owned by a member of the Tlingit tribe. In 1886, Sarkoi managed to get redress from the courts, which had to decide whether or not slavery was unlawful throughout the whole of the United States, or whether exceptions might be made for traditional communities. The case was heard in the Alaskan courts on May the 8th, 1886, before Judge Dawson. A link to the judgment in the case may be found in the description of this video. The owners of Sarkoi opposed his claim to be freed, and their reasons are simply breathtaking. Well, to those that have swallowed the myth of chattel slavery as being something introduced to North America by the white people, they're breathtaking. I don't think it's going to surprise many people watching this channel. But anyway, they claim that Sarkoi was their slave and chattel. So at once we know that we are dealing actually with chattel slavery. People might recall that I discussed the question of chattel slavery on here recently on this channel. This is most definitely a case of chattel slavery, as the court documents made clear. The Tlingit went on to assert that they and their ancestors have inhabited the Alaskan shores from time immemorial, and that the buying, selling and holding of slaves is one of the rules and customs of their race and tribe. And right there we have it. First Nation peoples of America are claiming to a court that chattel slavery is part of their way of life, and that this traditional lifestyle was not to be interfered with by white people. One is reminded of the efforts of the British to stamp out slavery in Africa, and the way in which the Africans resisted the abolition of slavery on the grounds it was part of their traditional way of life. The first white explorers to North America, by the way, noticed that most of the tribes they encountered used slavery. It certainly wasn't the case that they brought it. They remarked upon it, sometimes unfavourably. They saw slavery all over North America. The idea that it was brought to the practice of slavery was brought to America by white people is simply a lie. Although they don't realise it, probably, the sort of people that claim that slavery didn't exist in Africa or North America before the coming of the white man are actuated themselves by racism. They have an image of those continents being inhabited by peaceful and industrious and creative people who were in harmony with nature, not prone to the cruelty that Europeans tended to practice. During the Enlightenment in 18th century Europe, Rousseau came up with the idea of the noble savage. That's people living in a state of nature who hadn't come into contact with European civilization, and they were somehow free of sin and lived elevated lives in tune with nature and at peace with their fellow man. It's this distorted worldview which causes people to deny that in Africa or America slavery could possibly have existed before the coming of white people. The truth is, of course, that no civilization or race has a monopoly on either virtue or wickedness. Black people and Africans and Native Americans, First Nation people can be just as wicked and cruel as any white European can be. Europe's no more to blame for slavery than any other area in the world. As I say, I provide a link to the case in 1886 above. Just look in the description of the video and scroll down if you can't see it at once, and then there's a link to the court papers for this. It's concrete proof that at least one group of First Nation people believed and were prepared to argue the point in court that chattel slavery had always been an integral part of their culture and way of life.